Hello and good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you're all safe and well on this very chilly evening. I'm Joss Holmes and I'm the North Yorkshire County Council's Climate Change Policy Officer. So welcome to this session on how to respond to the North Yorkshire Council Climate Change Strategy draft for consultation, which went live on the 13th of February. The session is being recorded and so we will be publishing that on our website after the event. If you want to let any friends know about it, they can look at it slightly later. We are having this event, it's the third in a series, to tell people how they can respond to the consultation, which is currently live. The first event was held specifically for town and parish councils, and the second one for voluntary and community sector groups and colleagues. And so we're welcoming tonight everybody else that has an interest in this area. So the presentation this evening then is going to take you through the background to the strategy, the themes that we're seeking feedback on, very importantly, how we'd like you to give us your views. Then I'll talk a little bit about what's going to happen next, and then we can open up to questions. So please post those questions into the chat function and we'll take them after the presentation in about 15 minutes or so. So I'd like to emphasise we're very, very happy to take questions and comments on the climate change draft strategy. But that any comments or questions that you ask us tonight or any issues that are raised won't form part of the consultation process. So it's really important that you respond in the ways that I'm going to outline in the presentation, and that's so that we can accurately record all the views and the comments that come in. So on the call this evening, supporting me and supporting this piece of work, we have Neil Irving, who's the Assistant Director for Policy, Partnerships and Communities and currently responsible for climate change at North Yorkshire County Council. We have Michael Lear, who is the Assistant Director for Travel, Environment, Countryside and Waste, and Michael will be taking over from Neil from the 1st of April with climate change and natural capital in his portfolio. We also have colleagues Tracy Flint, who's the Recycling and Climate Officer from Hambleton District Council, and Fiona Prothero, who's the Climate Emergency Officer at Craven District Council. And then colleagues acting behind the scenes, we've got Charlie Christopher from our communications team, who's very kindly put together all the communications packs around the climate change work, and also Simon from our IT team, who's facilitating the event this evening. So I'll go straight into the presentation now. So if you could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I will just mention before I start on the content of the slide, you'll probably see our branding down in that bottom right hand corner, North Yorkshire Council, that we're going to be from the 1st of April. So just a reminder, and I hope lots of you who are listening to this webinar will already be aware that in North Yorkshire, we're bringing together the 8 local authorities, the county council and the 7 district and borough councils into one new unitary council for North Yorkshire, and that's going to be live from the 1st of April, which is very exciting for all of us. Also, throughout the presentation and the document, for those of you who have had a chance to read it already, we do use terms and expressions which can use quite scientific language. We have tried to make sure it's accessible to everybody, but to help people along who aren't familiar with some of that terminology that we're using, in the climate change strategy that's available on the website, the full version, there is a glossary at the back that's got some of these concepts and some of these terms with a bit of explanation in them. So please do have a look at that at your leisure if you want to know a little bit more about some of the terms that we're using. So the North Yorkshire County Council Executive declared a climate emergency last year, and we also endorsed a document called the Route Map to Carbon Negative, which is a plan for the whole of York and North Yorkshire to reduce carbon emissions. And by carbon here, we mean just shorthand for all greenhouse gases, so we're not just talking about carbon. We have a very strong ambition to be a carbon negative region by 2040, and that means our plans indicate that it is possible, it's technically possible, that we will emit less greenhouse gases, or we'll emit less than zero greenhouse gases. So the route map to carbon negative is for all the partners, whether that's central government, local government, private businesses, organisations like the NHS and Yorkshire Water, utilities companies, academic institutions, etc., as well as all the town and parish councils, the community groups, everybody, all the residents that make up the area. So the North Yorkshire Council Climate Change Strategy doesn't replace the route map. It's rather saying that of all those partners involved in this ambitious plan and this ambitious target to get to carbon negative by 2040, it describes what the council's role is. So North Yorkshire Council's role in responding to the climate emergency and what is our role in delivering the route map. And that's what we would like your feedback on. So next slide, thank you. So the strategy brings together all the individual pieces of the jigsaw, so all the services and the activities that North Yorkshire Council will be responsible to deliver into one picture on how we can respond to the climate emergency. So the strategy document has got lots of data and statistics in about North Yorkshire in particular. It also outlines the international and the national policy context in which we're working, so that we know we have a legal obligation in the UK to be net zero by 2050, and there's lots of national policy that will help us to achieve that aim. The strategy also outlines the principles and the co-benefits that we will follow in delivering the strategy. And we also talk in the document about monitoring and performance. So how we're going to make sure that we're making sufficient progress towards our target. And we very much welcome your comments and your feedback on those sort of general preamble type issues in the strategy. We then move on to our three themes of mitigation, adaptation and supporting nature. Now we need to do all of these things and group together. If all our activities tick those three elements, we call them in the strategy climate responsible actions. And we want to enable everybody in North Yorkshire to take climate responsible actions. So the strategy goes into quite a lot of detail. So I'll just run through some of those issues. The first one is mitigation. So that's reducing our impact on the climate by decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. So here we're talking about reducing our demand for energy. And we talk about doing this through developing low carbon travel and transport, and that's including active travel, so cycling and walking. And also looking at alternative fuels to the traditional fossil fuels. We talk about insulating buildings and providing energy efficiency programmes for properties and housing and low carbon heating options. And that's for our own activity, our own properties as local authority, but also for buildings and homes throughout North Yorkshire. We'd like to support appropriate locally generated renewable energy. That might be large scale and it might be quite small scale at community energy scale within communities and settlements throughout North Yorkshire. We're going to continue to promote the reduction of waste, so we're keeping more products circulating within the economy. So we call that the circular economy. So we have some a section on how we can reduce our waste. We also know that we can't reduce all our carbon emissions. We won't get to a state where we can really reduce everything that we do. So we are going to have to recognise the need to capture and store carbon emissions. And we might do that in organic settings such as trees and hedgerows and peat, which is very important for us in North Yorkshire. But we might also look at industrial processes to capture and store that carbon as well. We're also looking to be working with partners to reduce agricultural emissions as well across the area. And finally, in this section, we also talk about supporting everyone in North Yorkshire to take those climate responsible choices. So we might plan to work with partners around communications and encouraging people to understand the causes, the impacts and the solutions for climate change and to make their daily choices accordingly. So that's our mitigation section. The next section we come on to is adaptation. And this is about preparing for the changing climate. Now, we do know that whatever we do now and in the future for mitigation, so to reduce those greenhouse gases, both ourselves, other local authorities, other countries globally, we do know we are going to get a changing climate. We know the temperature is going to rise probably by at least 1.5 degrees at global temperature. And we know that this is going to have an impact on our current climate. So this is going to result in more extreme weather events. It might result in more hot and dry periods, such as we had in the summer. It might result in more frequent storm surges, which might result in more flooding. Now, those will have impacts on us locally, of course they will, and many areas of North Yorkshire have seen the impacts of flooding in the past, for example. But we also know that it's going to affect our global supply chain. So what happens in one country might be miles away from us, has a direct impact on us in this country, and that's due to our global supply chains. So that might impact on, just as a local example, current example, the types of food products that you can get in the supermarkets, for example. We also know that climate change is going to have an impact it's going to have a health impact, and that will have a disproportionate effect on our more vulnerable people in the community as well. So it's really vital that we develop our plans to adapt to the changing climate and build up that resilience. That's the resilience of our own services, so all the things that we deliver as a local authority, but it's also supporting businesses and their global supply chains and communities as well to make sure that we are resilient. So adaptation is actually quite a new area of work for local authorities. Obviously, for many years we've been offering very strong emergency planning responses to events such as flooding, etc. But actually preparing very comprehensive plans, recognising the changing climate that we're going to experience. It's quite a new piece of work for a lot of local authorities. So because of that, in the strategy, we're proposing to develop our climate change adaptation plan jointly with the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, who have a strong lead in this area, and also jointly with other local authorities in the Yorkshire and Humber area. And that means that we can move together at the same pace as each other in the field of adaptation. So a really exciting new area of work for us. The third aspect is supporting nature, and that's helping the natural world on which we depend to thrive. So in this section, we recognise that the natural world is our friend in responding to climate change emergency, but that in itself, it also is in a depleted state, and we can't solve one problem without the other. So to help us find solutions for tackling climate change, we need a healthy natural environment. That's both for things like carbon storage that I mentioned earlier, so storing carbon in trees and hedgerows and peat as example, but also for adaptation. So when we're talking about trying to reduce the impacts of heavy storms and flooding, for example. We've seen lots of good examples, good practice around upstream catchments and the use of trees and natural environment for slowing the flow of that water, so it doesn't have quite such a catastrophic impact downstream. Obviously, a healthy natural environment is also really important for food production. As you'll know, North Yorkshire, vastly rural county, lots of food production needs a strong, healthy natural environment to support that. And also just for the health and well-being of society. We all know that we value the natural environment. Obviously, the COVID lockdowns demonstrated that even more. So for our own health and well-being as well, we need to support the natural environment to thrive. So those are our 3 key themes that we'd like your feedback on, and what you think we should be doing to implement those themes and to enable us to take climate responsible choices. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So this slide is the most important, how we would like you to give us your views by the 7th of April. So that's the closing date for our consultation. And we've got 5 key ways for people to contact us. The first one is through the Let's Talk Climate platform. This is really aimed at residents and perhaps individual businesses, and it provides the opportunity to do a summary, quick response. It takes about 10 minutes that you can do on a mobile phone or on a tablet. So you can see a link there to the Let's Talk platform, and colleagues on the call are going to just put that into the chat function so that you can copy and paste it if you would like to sign up. So we as a council have used the Let's Talk platform previously, and we're planning to use it again quite soon for a transport questionnaire. So if you sign up to Commonplace, you'll also be notified when those sorts of questionnaires are also live. And we've got about 3,000 people already signed up to Let's Talk. So we really welcome your feedback via the Let's Talk platform. The second way, if you would like to see a full copy of the strategy, it is 57 pages, but it's all good stuff, then you can look at that on our County Council website. And again, the link is there and colleagues will be putting that into the chat function for you. If you haven't got time to read it all, I would recommend reading page 6 because that's what we call a plan on a page, and that summarises what the rest of it says just in one page. In that document, we also have the glossary that I mentioned earlier, and also the link to the route map to carbon negative and all the other documents that are referenced in the text. So it's a really good library of information apart from anything else that can take you straight to government policy documents, the current climate reduction strategies and action plans of the current councils, and a wealth of other information. So if you'd like to read that all, that's fantastic. And then if you want to give us a response that's perhaps a little bit more thorough and detailed than the Let's Talk process, then we welcome an open response. You can tell us anything you like about the strategy, and that's directly by email to climatechange@northyorks.gov.uk. And that way we'll be able to log those comments perhaps in a little bit more detail. The third way of responding is through our libraries, our fantastic network of community libraries across North Yorkshire. They have all got paper reference copies. Please don't take them away. And we'll welcome you into the library, show you where that reference copy is to read, and they will help you to get onto the Let's Talk platform if that's the way you would like to respond. Or they do have paper response forms as well if you would rather complete that in hard copy. So do just pop along to the library if you would like to see a hard copy. The other 2 areas, we haven't published these yet, but they will be soon. And if you just keep abreast of our social media platforms or the websites, then more information will be coming out shortly about these. So the first one is a young people survey, which is absolutely fantastic. I've seen a version of it, and we're very grateful to the young people of Harrogate Youth Council who have helped to prepare the consultation questions and the engagement activity on that one. So thanks very much to them. That will be coming out quite soon, and they will also have the full 8 weeks. So although we haven't launched their consultation yet, they will get the full 8 weeks for their to get as many responses to their questions as we can. And then lastly, colleagues from the communications department and climate colleagues such as Tracy and Fiona and myself that are on the call this evening are going to be at out and about events around North Yorkshire over the next couple of weeks. So we'll be having stalls at markets, coffee mornings, etc., just to talk people through the climate change strategy. We'll have an iPad if people want to do the Let's Talk response then and there, or just be talking to people about how they can respond. So again, if you just keep on top of social media, the details of where will be published there. So next slide, thank you. Okay, so what happens next? I would like to reassure you at this time that although this is a very exciting area of work and we're spending a lot of time engaging with community groups and people to get feedback, it doesn't mean that we're not doing anything whilst this is happening. We haven't paused for breath whilst all this is happening. I mentioned just previously that we do have 8 climate strategies, one for each authority, and you can see those referenced in the strategy document if you want to have a look online to see what we're all doing. So whilst we're going through this process of planning our strategic approach for the new unitary authority, we are still delivering lots of activity around climate change. So things like electric vehicle charging points, installations, sustainable warmth, home energy efficiency programmes, leisure centre decarbonisation, tree planting programmes, waste minimisation campaigns and grant schemes with a good strong link to low carbon are all being worked on at this moment. So just because we're doing the strategic work now doesn't mean we're waiting and not doing anything in the meantime. However, come the 7th of April, we'll be collating all the information from the consultation responses and the feedback from the Let's Talk climate platform, and we'll be developing those into the new North Yorkshire Council climate change strategy for the completed document, hopefully being able to accommodate and take on board your views and aspirations. And we'll be asking members to approve that final document later on in the spring of 2023. And after that time, we'll be creating a new climate change action plan. So to bring together those 8 plans that I talked about and adding on top of that the layer from the new strategy as well. As well as the action plans sort of externally facing, we're also developing an action plan to meet our aspiration to be net zero by 2030 operationally as the new council. So that's all the vehicles, the fleet that we own, the buildings that we run and manage, and our operational activity. So a very strong and ambitious target there as well. So we'll be developing an action plan to help us to reach that as well. So over the next few weeks and months, if you would like to know more and to keep yourself informed about this area of work, then I'd really encourage you to sign up to our climate change newsletter. We've had 3 so far, and hopefully colleagues will just pop that sign up into the chat so you can copy and paste it and sign up. So in that newsletter, which we're anticipating being monthly, it's just by direct email, it's not a hard copy newsletter. We'll be giving you lots of information about the activities of North Yorkshire Council in terms of climate change, but we don't want to just show North Yorkshire Council activity. We want to be able to share a huge wealth of superb climate activity out there in the field, whether that's from businesses, communities, individual residents, tourist attractions, etc. Because what we recognise, and I'm sure all of us on this call recognise this, is that it's not just one partner's or one organisation's responsibility to work towards our ambition to be carbon negative. We've all got to work together and take action together. So we really want that newsletter to be a showcase for the wonderful activity that's already happening, and we hope to expand on, and so that we can learn from each other and scale up some of these good ideas and practices that are happening around North Yorkshire. So that's the end of the presentation. So we'll just take a pause for breath for a moment, and then our colleagues will just be looking at those questions and seeing if we have anything that we need to clarify for you. Thanks very much for listening. So do we have any questions, colleagues?
Yeah, there's a few questions come in, Joss, not many. So if anybody wants to put in their question, then they can do. So we'll start off with a question from Nick. What actions are proposed to encourage onshore wind? Most of the best places for wind are in the national parks or areas of outstanding natural beauty. A typical wind turbine generates 2 megawatts. Is it realistic to expect 500 turbines to generate 1 megawatt when we only have a handful now? Quite a specific question.
Yeah, so we have some national policy on wind turbines, and the council, as with all councils, would be following that national policy on wind turbines. We're not renewable energy comes in a range of scales, as I'm sure many of you on the call will be aware. So we might be talking about a large number of wind turbines or a small number of small wind turbines. But with all our renewable energy activity, we would like to support and encourage community energy to develop. And this is where the power source, the renewable energy, is owned and managed and run by local people, so that they get the benefit of having the renewable energy that's available for us outside our windows. So we will be following national policy on this, and we do have some spectacular landscapes and protected landscapes where that policy will no doubt be a lot stronger. But we would like to encourage community energy as part of our strategic approach.
So the next question is, as part of the adaptation plan, would you reject planning applications for new developments in flood zone 2, medium risk of flooding?
Okay, I'm slightly going to bypass that as a specific question and talk about two plans which are in development. So the first plan is our overall local plan. So as we come together as North Yorkshire Council, we're going to be developing a new local plan, and we have to develop that within 5 years. And we've been having some good early conversations with the new planning team around really having climate change as a thread running through that local plan. And that, when I talk about climate change, I don't just mean the mitigation side, but I also mean the adaptation and the supporting nature side as well. So that planning framework, which will go through the open consultation process, will set out the areas for development and what type of appropriate development is going to be available. So I'm going to bypass the specifics on that question and just talk about the local plan and how that's developing. And encourage people to be involved in that. I did say I would mention a second plan, so I'll just do that now, not to do with flooding, but to do with local transport. So again, new authority, we're going to be developing our new local transport plan. And we have 2 years in which to do this. And again, we're going to be identifying how that local transport plan can contribute towards fewer carbon emissions from transport, and we're actually going to be quantifying those. They're called quantifiable carbon reductions or targets. That's going to be the subject of another Let's Talk questionnaire platform that's going to be coming out quite soon, called Let's Talk Transport. So I did just want to mention that on today's call as well.
Right, next question. What actions are proposed to encourage farmers to create solar farms? About 100 hectares will generate around 1.2 megawatts, so probably 80,000 plus hectares will be needed to generate around 1,000 megawatts. When PV panels are suitably mounted, cattle or sheep can graze under the panels or crops planted between rows of panels. So this seems a better option for North Yorkshire. Is this your view?
I think you're treading onto quite difficult territory there. Now, we do know that there is a conflict, or not necessarily a conflict, but differences of views around the types of land use, particularly in a rural patch. So we have some of the best and most versatile agricultural land in the UK, and it's important that's protected for food supply purposes, food production purposes. But we also know that we do need to generate renewable energy at scale. So these sorts of discussions are about what the land could be used for, whether it's best used for agricultural production or for carbon sequestration, which is the planting of trees or organic matter, for example, to store carbon, or for the production of renewable energy. I just refer you to the previous answer around the planning framework, and the planning framework will and the planning decisions will decide which types of development are suitable for which areas. But it is difficult. It is a difficult question, and like many areas in the UK, particularly the rural areas and the agriculturally productive areas, we do have that various uses for land, which of course is in short supply.
The next question is, would you consider no car zones in town centres as a way of reducing emissions from transport and increasing active travel? 25% of car trips are under 1 mile and 71% under 5 miles.
Thank you for that question. Yes, in the strategy, we do talk about, I think that's back onto me now. Thank you for that question. Yeah, in the strategy, we do talk about promoting active travel and modal shift and encouraging people to walk and cycle to services which are near them. So we talk about 15-minute neighbourhoods, and you may have seen in the press quite a lot of pushback against 15-minute neighbourhoods in some other authorities in England, but it is still a concept that we are very interested in promoting. So this is to make sure that access to services in our market towns and our communities around the patch are available and accessible within 15-minute journey time by foot or by bike. And our colleagues in transport planning have got some programmes in place to encourage local cycling and walking implementation plans. And we're actively bidding all the time to implement those plans. So that would facilitate people actively travelling, cycling and walking into their local villages and towns where they can access their services. Now, that might result in no car zones, but I can't say one way or the other today whether it would or it wouldn't. And those decisions would be very much for local people to decide. It's very much, I'm sorry to say it again, but it's another planning matter. It is a planning matter around the development and the shape of our places, but it would be up for local people to decide whether they wanted that area to be car free or a low emission zone or that type of activity. But we can promote the enabling people to get to those locations safely and without needing to get into their cars.
The next question is, how will the increase in journey by bicycle be increased by 900%? None of the newly built housing or current developments have good access by bike around Harrogate. population, 75,000 and growing. The newest cycle lane along a short length of Otley Road is virtually unused. It is so badly designed. What do you envisage will be done to enable more safe journeys by bike in Harrogate?
Thank you for that question. I'm not going to talk about a specific area because I'm not over familiar with that particular example. But just really to follow on from the question that we discussed earlier, we are looking to promote active travel, and the way we can do that is through providing safe routes. But in a sense, there's no point in providing a safe route unless people choose to use it. So one of our principles that I mentioned earlier in the strategy is that if we try to make a capital improvement to a place like a cycle lane, that we also follow that up with some activity to encourage people to use that facility. And that might be through our bikeability programs that we run with schools, for example, or through promoting bike sharing, through and also if people have heard of this, the Library of Things, where we encourage communities to share resources. So you might have 3 or 4 electric bikes owned by a community that people can just leap on and share, or perhaps unlock with an app and use them. So we can provide the infrastructure to encourage cycling and walking, but we would always try and follow that up with the sort of the behaviour change and encouraging people to walk and cycle. For example, to schools, we've got a fantastic team that encourage active travel to schools, and we could wrap that around with safe routes as well. So it's about the capital, but also about the encouraging the behaviour change. And as I mentioned in the previous answer, we are bidding constantly to government for the funding to implement these active travel routes, which do amount to millions of pounds to install. So it is sad when they're not used, as perhaps that person was indicating. Yeah, just another word about the particular target there. It's the targets, we don't actually identify targets in our strategy, because the targets we're aspiring to achieve are for the route map to carbon negative, and that's all of York and North Yorkshire. So some of those cycling miles will be in the city of York, which is a cycle friendly city. So I'm not trying to say that we're not going to achieve any of them, but it's not just North Yorkshire, it's also York as well.
So the next question, does the council plan intend to decarbonise their supply chain? How will this be achieved? Will the council require contracts to have science-based targets and for them to share their scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions with the council?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yep, our supply chain is incredibly important to our carbon footprint, as it is to all local authorities, and we've done a lot of work already to improve our understanding of that carbon footprint. Obviously, as a council, we buy in many of our goods and services to deliver out to the community. So we have a new procurement strategy, and that does indicate our willingness to encourage suppliers to incorporate what's called social value into the goods and services which they are offering to us when we put out bids, when we put out tenders for procurement. So there's that side of it where we are encouraging our suppliers to develop their social value, and that might be environmental value or sort of social values such as local subcontractors and local training provision, for example. So we are working on that area. And along with colleagues from all the authorities in York and North Yorkshire, we have developed some bespoke toolkits to help us to do that, which we're currently working through. So that's on the buying side. On the supplying side, so we're encouraging our local businesses throughout North Yorkshire to bid for and win our contracts that we offer. And we're also encouraging those local suppliers to be able to decarbonise themselves, not just for our contracts, but for all the other contracts that they might, the public sector contracts that they might bid for. And we do this in partnership with the Local Enterprise Partnership, the York and North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership, and their Growth Hub, which is the organisation specifically in existence to support businesses, and particularly small to medium-sized businesses throughout York and North Yorkshire. And they offer a range of advice and programmes for businesses to decarbonise. So it's partly on the what we're buying side, and it's partly working with our local businesses to encourage that they have the skills and the knowledge to decarbonise their own businesses in the same way that we are looking at the fleet and the building and the packaging and the reduction in their waste emissions. So it's a kind of two-pronged approach, but it's a really important point, and thank you very much for highlighting it, because in common with all local authorities, the amount of money we spend on buying services, to buying in products and services, particularly sort of construction, we're looking after highways, remember, is much higher than the amount that we spend internally on our services. So a really important point. Thank you for bringing that out.
Thank you, Joss. I'd like to just introduce Michael Lear, who's the Assistant Director for Environmental and Countryside, who would like to say a few points on the questions that have been raised. Over to you, Michael.
Hello, good evening. Thanks for that, Charlie. Thanks, colleagues. So yes, my name is Michael Lear, the Assistant Director for Travel and Environmental Services at the County Council currently, and will be responsible for the climate change agenda into the Unitary Council. I just thought it would be useful to add a bit more context to the responses Joss has been providing on all of those the transport questions that we've had. As you can see, there's quite a few of those. So I thought I'd just provide that broader picture. In terms of what we've noticed over the last few years, Joss was describing the opportunity to bid for funding. Government have been providing larger pots of funding available for active travel, particularly since COVID, as we've noticed more people are wanting to be out and about and using the network in a different way. So rather than by travelling by car, either by bike or on foot, and indeed potentially by, well, since the pandemic's ended, we're looking at bus as well. So across those different modes of transport, government are looking to do a bit of a modal shift to move people out of car and providing more opportunity for funding. And so that's what Joss is describing. So through the local transport plan engagement and consultation that the council will be doing later in the year, it's a really good opportunity to put some views in terms of where we should prioritise our effort against that agenda, as well as this consultation here. So absolutely, yes, it's something that we are sighted on and want to look out for. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Joss.
Okay, we'll have another question. So I broadly welcome the strategy, but damage is being done right now. Retrofitting of buildings is great, but what of the mass developments going up now in Harrogate and Knaresborough, and to be fair, all over North Yorkshire? And I'm seeing solar panels on these roofs and assume that gas boilers are being fitted, which will have to be ripped out.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Again, we are slightly in the hands of national policy for the current houses that are going up. There are legislative requirements called future builders standards, which will require a higher level of energy efficiency for new build housing, but I don't believe those have come in just yet. So we are kind of in the hands of that national legislation at present time. But we do talk in the strategy about wanting to encourage our new housing stock to be as energy efficient as possible and as soon as possible. What I would say with existing gas boilers going in, it doesn't mean they're going to have to be taken out in the future. It's just not going to be allowed any new ones to go in. But yes, I mean, I take your point entirely around it. It's perhaps not the most appropriate heating source to go into a new house. For those of you who are particularly interested in the future of the gas grid, I would urge you to have a look at our local area energy plans, and you can find those referenced in the strategy in the supporting documents section at the back, as I've already mentioned. They're called LEAPs, local energy plans, local area energy plans. And so we have 3 covering North Yorkshire, and they look at all the current and future predicted energy needs, both for electricity but also for gas, because there is an understanding that our gas networks may be able to be converted in the future to take green hydrogen. So in terms of ripping out gas boilers, it's possible, depending where that particular location is, that the gas grid will stay in that area and be used for green hydrogen instead. So I would urge people with a particular interest in that to look at those local area energy plans to get a better feel for the future supply and demand of gas in our area.
The strategy seems very light on agriculture, despite this sector being responsible for most of North Yorkshire emissions. Can you elaborate on the specifics of how you will decarbonise this sector?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And I absolutely knew we would get a question on this subject because people feel very, very strongly about it. We do talk about agricultural emissions in the strategy, so we haven't left it out altogether. But I would just remind people that this is North Yorkshire Council's strategy, and our touch points with the agricultural sector are quite limited. Now, as an authority, we are and will be responsible for the areas of outstanding natural beauty and managing those, and through those, we are able to distribute grant support to the farming sector called Farming in Protected Landscapes. And a number of those grants, well, all of them, in fact, have been used for environmental enhancements. So we do have the ability to support farmers in the protected landscapes, as do the national park authorities. We also have our own network of county farms, which are run by our property services team, and they are currently doing some work with those farmers to look at the opportunities that they have to decarbonise their particular farm activity. We're also working in partnership with the Local Enterprise Partnership, as I mentioned earlier, and they have a programme called Grow Yorkshire. And that's working very closely with the farming community, again looking at farming emissions on an individual farm by farm basis, and doing some calculations on an individual farm basis. So those are just some examples of where we currently have touch points with the farming community, but we're talking about your views and what you would like us to do as a local authority. So if you have strong views about this subject, then please do let us know what actions you think North Yorkshire Council could and should take to address this area.
Another question, will there be funds available to enable updated feasibility studies to be done for community energy projects with the current high energy prices, presumably making renewables even more cost effective?
Okay, so not directly related to this strategy consultation, apart from, as I referenced earlier, very supportive of community energy projects. And I know there are a number of feasibility studies around North Yorkshire that have happened in the past and then not been able to come to implementation stage. So we might be talking about a community venue here that would like to put some solar panels and some battery storage on, for example, or it might be community owned anaerobic digester or a community owned wind farm or wind turbine or solar panels, for example, and we've got some fantastic examples of hydroelectric power that are in community ownership and management, for example. So not directly related to the strategy, because we're not talking about feasibility funding particularly in the strategy, but I would just point you towards the North Yorkshire Shared Prosperity Fund, and I'm hoping a colleague can pop the link to that into the chat. This is a fund run by, just recently opened and successfully awarded to North Yorkshire County Council to deliver. And that encourages community groups to get together and to develop their approaches to whatever's important in their community, which can also include community energy. And there is money in there for things like feasibility studies. So for that particular question about feasibility studies and how we might fund them, I would just point you at the North Yorkshire Shared Prosperity Fund. Thank you.
The next question is about our overall approach. What's not clear to me is how to include all communities in the low carbon transition. So is an inclusive approach central to your thinking so no community gets left behind? And if so, how?
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased somebody has raised this. It is absolutely central to our approach. It's outlined in the principles section of the strategy, and we call it the just transition or the equal transition. And the transition is to the low carbon economy. So we know that the economy, all the things around us that make society work, is transitioning to low carbon. And we don't want anybody to be left behind by this, whether they're in a rural area which has got struggling with electrical grid capacity, whether they are in a poorly heated home, a poorly energy efficient home, for example, or whether they don't have access to the ability to purchase an electric vehicle, which we all know are quite expensive at the present time. So very, very important to us that we bring everybody with us in this just transition to the low carbon economy. And a number of programmes that we're operating currently and hope to operate in the future are around enabling people to have low carbon heating choices in their homes, to be able to access electric vehicles, maybe through shared ownership, for example, to enable them to access electric vehicle charging points in their community. And we've been very successful with a local electric vehicle infrastructure grant to trial some very innovative approaches to developing renewable energy and storage options for those places where the grid capacity isn't strong enough, for example. So it is absolutely central to us to take people with us on this journey. So I mentioned earlier in my presentation that we've made a similar presentation to this evening, specifically to the voluntary and community sector. And that's colleagues who work with some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, whether it's by dint of kind of age or disability, or access to services or skills, for example. So very much wanting to bring the voluntary and community sector with us on this journey, and for them to help their client groups as well to engage. Working very closely again with the York and North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership on developing green skills. So we know the jobs of the future will be in the green skills industry. They'll be in electric vehicle servicing. They'll be in renewable energy servicing, and we'll need hundreds of engineers to fit and then to maintain air source heat pumps, for example. So the Local Enterprise Partnership working very hard on developing the skills that are required to support that, and that will translate into local jobs in our community, and hopefully local people be able to be upskilled to get those jobs. So it's a great question, and really welcome everybody's views on how we can bring everybody with us on this journey. Remember, I'm doing a lot of talking tonight, but I do want you to remember this is about you giving us your views on the consultation, and so we really welcome your views on these issues.
Next question, I think you might have just touched on this actually, Joss. Are you working with the National Grid stroke DNOs to understand their plans for reinforcing the grid? I cannot use all my available roof due to DNO limitations.
Yep, thank you for that question. And again, it's another question I knew we would get, because we get lots of people telling us they want to do community energy type projects or private sector renewable energy projects and do have some difficulties around grid connection. So yes, we're working with the Northern Power Grid in our case, and also Northern Gas Networks. And I think the reason, Tracy, that I touched on it earlier is because I mentioned about our local area energy plans, and that's the partnership, that's the piece of work that really brings those things together. So we do know that we've got grid capacity issues here. That's why small scale community energy is so important to us locally, because although we do struggle with large scale grid connections, within our substations we've got a lot of headroom, and some of those small scale community energy projects would be able to fit right into that headroom immediately. We do know that grid reinforcement is a massive issue for us, and if you would like to tell us that, to reinforce that as part of the consultation process, then I would welcome your comments on that as well. And specific examples would be even more helpful.
The next question is about monitoring. How will carbon reduction targets be set and monitored? Are you partnering with university researchers to achieve this?
Thank you. Yeah, really important point. So we do touch on performance monitoring in the strategy, not in huge detail. So if anybody would like to give us their views on that, that would be very welcome. So we currently take most of our data, which is sort of given to us by what was the Department of Bays, which has now been sort of split into two, and now we have feedback from Energy Security and Net Zero Department. So they'll be providing us with the kind of the figures for the whole of North Yorkshire. Our local figures at North Yorkshire Council, in terms of our own aspirations to be net zero, we will be calculating ourselves based on our utility bills, for example, and our mileage used, and we hope to see those continuing to decrease as they have been over the last few years. And you can see that information on our council website now. The websites will be switching over to the new council on the 1st of April, so we may not be updating them as often as we would normally whilst that transition takes place. But from the new council with our new website, you will be able to see that information, and you'll be able to look at what type of progress we're making. I also mentioned earlier that the targets that we have in the route map are across York and North Yorkshire. So again, we're working closely with the Local Enterprise Partnership, who developed the route map approach, to looking at how we revisit those metrics that are in the evidence document that supports it. So I'm conscious we're coming to the end of our time. I'm conscious I've done a lot of talking. So I would just like to invite any of the other people on the call if they would like to come in and make any final comments at all before we finish up. No, okay, so we've got the opportunity for maybe one last question. We could probably squeeze in one last question.
Okay, should we go for what is North York's Unitary Authority's draft budget allocation for supporting the carbon reduction strategy?
I wish we'd not had time for that question.
No, that's a big one. That's a big one.
I mean, I can probably take that if it helps, Joss.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So
just wait till I think Michael Lee is going to take this one.
Thank you, Joss. So I'm not going to give you a precise pound and pence because we're in the process of the local government reorganisation, and we're just working through the council's finances, or each of the 8 councils' finances. But what I can describe is the process that we're going through to form that. So each of the 8 organisations has a revenue allocation and a capital allocation. And in consolidating those budgets, the Yorkshire Council will have a revenue allocation towards this, which will fund internal operations. And as well as that, the capital allocations, which will essentially help deliver the projects that Joss and colleagues have been describing today, plus many others, which we've not had time to touch on today. So there will be funding available to do that, and there has been funding available to do that against each of the authorities to date. In addition to that, as has been described, the council will continue to take advantage of external funding opportunities that are available and seek to draw cash into the area. I can see that there's a question later on which we won't have time to come to, I doubt, but that talks about the Net Zero Fund offering £7 million of funding. So again, where there is money available, we will seek to take advantage of that and use that money in the best possible way to invest into this area for the county and in that instance the county and York combined. So in terms of concluding that and coming back to the question, once we've formed the Yorkshire Council and taken some time to understand the budget, then we'll be in a better position to set a recurring base budget position for the unitary. Thanks.
Do you want to come back to me and I'll just finish off? Okay, so thank you all so much for your questions. Just a reminder then, please send us your views by the 7th of April. Please do ask us if there's any questions further that you would like any clarification on. It's been a really good opportunity this evening to hear from a lot of people, but I'm sure there's lots more who perhaps didn't have the time to ask the specific questions. But thank you all very much for joining us. We really look forward to seeing your comments on the strategy and working very closely with you all to deliver our ambitions to be carbon negative and to all take climate responsible choices. So thank you all very much and good evening.